Okay, so I'm Annie Tindley. I'm a historian at Newcastle University, and I'm also a trustee of NHSN. And it's my absolute pleasure and privilege to be undertaking this series of Talking Naturally interviews. And today we have Louise Hislop. Louise, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Annie. I'm Louise Hislop. I'm in my mid-60s. I'm retired. And I suppose to try and describe, I would say I'm a naturalist, maybe an amateur entomologist. And I specialise particularly in bees, wasps and ants, so the aculeate Hymenoptera, but not include, so the wild species basically. So not really honeybees, that comes very much on the edge. So that's how I describe myself at the minute.
Excellent. And I suspect what we're going to find out over the next half an hour or so is that your idea of being retired might be a bit different to some others.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like that, yes. Yes, I occasionally think I must cut down on some things to make room for other things, yes.
Yes, I can imagine, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder if we could start then, Louise, by asking you how it was that you first got into natural history generally, and then I suppose specifically entomology as well.
So I think really I was thinking of who inspired me and where it started, and basically from birth. My parents were both naturalists, particularly interested in birds. My father was a great hill walker, mountaineer, climber. In fact, my mother climbed as well. And so, yeah, there was always that interest around. And my mother was particularly interested in botany, and they had a large garden. And so she was always interested in plants, particularly wildflowers initially, and then garden varieties. And she loved to name everything. I think that also has been very important, I realised as I was thinking about it. For the first 13 years, I lived in Hertfordshire in a nunnery, a converted nunnery that my parents and their friends had converted. So not quite a commune, but that sort of feeling, with 3 other families. And it had extensive gardens and an area around it. So it had fields and woods and walled vegetable garden and so on, and large areas of lawn and mature trees, and particularly oak trees, lovely old oak trees and so on. So that's really, and of course if you're surrounded by an oak tree, you're surrounded by insects and birds, and they would name stuff and look after things that were injured and whatever. We used to have there was a robin once they found frozen literally on the windowsill. So my mum took it in and put it in a box, and obviously the next day it was well enough to fly away and so on. So they just did those things, and that's just what they did. So that was always around me. And then when I was about 13, we moved up to Scotland, the west coast of Scotland, to Ayrshire.
Oh, wow.
And that's where they stayed the rest of their time. And holidays were always, we had this amazing garden originally, but it was a very small flat and they weren't well off. So it was, anything you could do for free from the garden. So fruit and vegetables basically is what we lived on. Eggs from the hens, which everybody shared. And so holidays were camping or a small cottage and walking and anything that was free. So I got into rocks, particularly fossils, because they were free and I could collect them for free. And whereas nothing else was free. We used to visit, archaeological sites as well, prehistoric things, Stonehenge and stuff. So it's a very broad sort of spectrum, I guess. I wouldn't say they were specialists, apart from my mum being able to do wildflowers, but they were interested in everything, and that sort of interest in everything is what set me off, I think. So yes, we moved to the west coast of Scotland, and even more holidays then up the west coast of Scotland, because my father loved the islands and climbing and so on. And then when I went to university at Newcastle to study geology,
right, okay,
that's what I was interested in, and specialised in the last year in paleontology, particularly, so fossils. But I also did minor courses in zoology, botany, physical anthropology, geology, geography, specialising in glaciation. I was fascinated by that. Lots of landscapes, everything to do with landscape and natural history, really. And then there was a bit of a gap, I suppose, when I went off and got a job and had a family and got married and had a family. And then really the actual more recent interest jumps ahead. We had a big ornamental cherry tree right next to the house. And it started affecting the house, so we had to cut it down and redesign the garden. And so I redesigned it for butterflies, which I was sort of interested in at the time. It seemed a thing to do. And then somebody gave me a digital camera, and then I was away and I was taking photographs, and I'd named I knew what all the plants were. So then I saw all these insects on them and thought, well, I want to know what they all are, thinking that was an easy job. Oh dear, no, not easy. And there were rather more than I thought as well. So that's how I got into it. And then I particularly got interested in the bees and the wasps and the hoverflies. Yeah. And really that stuck with me for the last 20 years. And I've just got more and more, you know, learned more and more about it. So that's where it started. And I did things like the FSC courses, you know, the Field Studies Council courses.
I was going to ask, was that kind of that later element kind of self-taught almost?
I would say it was very self-taught, because there weren't full books of keys as there are now for a lot of things. In fact, for wasps, there still aren't. We're hoping that there'll be one out shortly, but there weren't the keys. It was very difficult to get into, and you really had to do it for yourself. But then after a while, there were things, I discovered things like the Field Studies Centre, and they did some early courses, and so I met some really interesting people there. And also I got involved because I wanted to know what things were. Mm-hmm. I discovered the whole world of recording and all the recording schemes. And the first thing I discovered, chance, I think, just on the internet. It was early days of, you know, good internet connections. And I discovered the Bees, Wasps and Ants Recording Society, which is BWAS, so which covers exactly what I was looking at. And that really was a great jump for me. They had a meeting once a year. I could go to somewhere in the country and take a specimen or two with me and get them identified. So it was a very slow learning curve. So I would, you know, learn about stuff, take 2 specimens, get them named and move on to the next stage. But it was very, very slow compared with now, where you can put a picture up on the internet and somebody will tell you what it is in 10 minutes. It's changed totally. And so I met the people there and was very encouraged, particularly by Stuart Roberts to start with, who was the chair at the time. And also Mike Edwards and Jeremy Early have both been very supportive. They're not local to here, unfortunately, so that doesn't really fit in with your brief, but they were the ones that encouraged me. Yeah. And Mike particularly took me under his wing and pushed me towards projects which I would never have, you know, even thought I could do. So I did a project on the North Yorks Moors, looking for a very small mining bee called the Tormentil mining bee. Mm-hmm. And with a tiny DEFRA grant over 2 years, and I'm talking tiny, you know, a couple of £100 to do, you know, what I would for that money. And that sort of got me started. And through that, I joined the committee as secretary at one stage. And then because I'd been on this other one, I got involved with the short-haired bumblebee reintroduction program. Okay. Because I'd met Nicky Gammons, and which was great. So I went to Sweden 3 years in a row to collect queen bumblebees, which were introduced after quarantine, were introduced to Dungeness, which was fascinating. But Dungeness, could you have picked somewhere further away? I mean, you know, it wasn't really exactly on my doorstep. So although I went to Sweden, I couldn't really get involved with the rest of the project, but it's been fascinating to see it. And so I've been on the committee ever since, and I'm now the current chair. And that's been really good for my, you know, my knowledge of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it makes you realise that although, yes, you have come along this big path and you've learned lots of stuff, yes, you're not a real specialist. Yeah, I've met specialists and I'm not one of them. Yes. You know, I'm very interested. I'm becoming, but I'm definitely not, I suppose I am a specialist, but I'm not an expert. You know, these experts are just amazing. And I'm not a taxonomist. I'm very just interested in knowing what something is and watching its behavior, seeing its habitat and finding out all about it.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say there, just Louise, jumping in there, just you know, that it's almost like that you said, you know, that a slow learning curve, yes, pre-internet or early internet days, yes, and how important, you know, kind of societies, wherever they are, or networks or experts are. Yes. It's interesting that in a sense there's almost a move back to some of that. I think there's almost like a press against the sort of instant world of the internet, yes, but actually just going through that process is so kind of grounds you really into that interest.
And I think it's spread it to more people. It's made it more available more easily to people. And it does mean that in those early stages, when you really don't know what you're looking at, you can get easy help. You know, instead of taking 2 years to find out what 4 specimens are, you yes, can actually, you know, get them within a few days if they're easy, or at least be told, well, perhaps that's not an easy area to start with. Why don't you look at this? And here's a book you could do it from. And I think the books were coming anyway, but digital photography, the huge change in that and the social media between the two of them have really jumped things on.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm still an old-fashioned, I do Facebook, but because of the insects, not because of people.
Yeah.
I mean, the people are involved, but it's the insect groups I'm in. I'm not there for my friends. Don't contact me like that. I'm still old-fashioned in that way. But I haven't moved. I do Twitter, just about. I'm on the edge of tweet, I would say. That's about it. And I haven't worked out any of the other things at all. I probably should, but
there's just too many. Yeah,
there's too many. Yes, I'd rather stick with the different insects than the different social groups. But I mean, I think it has moved things on hugely for other people, and it means keys and things are available, and you can find out if they're available. It's as silly as that. Rather than spending hours trawling for stuff and looking in libraries, somebody will tell you whether it exists or not, and if it doesn't, you're not wasting your time going to look for it.
Yes.
But you don't want to go too far the other way. I know at one stage we've been talking about, oh well, you'll get a little machine that'll come along and you'll touch it to an insect, or even just point it at an insect and it'll tell you what they are, and we're all going, well, that's not interesting, is it?
Yeah.
Yes, we'll know what it is, but it's not really, there's no battle in it. It's like a quiz. If somebody gave you all the answers, what's the interest in that? You don't have a jigsaw puzzle to be given it made up. You've got to have that effort. There's got to be some enjoyment in the effort, otherwise there's no point doing it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the pursuit or the investigation of it.
It's
part of the pleasure.
Investigation. Yes, it is investigation. It's being like a detective.
Yes.
To work things out from all sorts of different clues.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well, I think, that although there's a bit of a northeast focus here, obviously, but it's those national connections and your international connections as well, which it's all an interconnected natural world, isn't it? So
yes, and as you say, international as well. But also the nice thing about even the national Facebook groups for recording schemes and so on, you can still then find out who's local to you. And I've met people that I didn't know existed.
Yes.
Through that internet system, I've gone, yeah, okay, well, let's go and look for this and this. And they've been, particularly this last year, I've met a couple of really good entomologists, well, people who are really becoming good entomologists through that method, who I would never have met on the ground, because I might have seen, one of them wandering around, but you don't approach, a strange man. You're wandering around with stuff on the ground. They're wandering around with a camera taking photographs. You don't go up to them and say, are you interested in bees? Unless they're literally talking to you about a very narrow thing. You don't. So yeah, I mean, I guess bird watchers, it's slightly different. You can see somebody's a bird watcher by what they're doing.
Yes.
But I suppose at a specific site you might guess what they're doing, but otherwise, yeah.
Yes.
So it's a strange world.
Yes.
And it is a very strange hobby. I mean, the number of times people stop me to say, what are you doing? Can I ask you what you're doing? And I'm going, oh well, I'm or have you lost a contact lens? That's the other one. Contact lens. I've had that about 10 times. And I say, well, I'm looking at the bees here, and oh, there are no bees there. No, look, that is a bee. And then you have to start spending time explaining to them what it is. And they're fascinating once they know.
Yeah.
Really great. But it's this, telling you that you're not looking at a bee when you are. I find that very difficult to be.
Oh, no.
Everybody's the same. So, yeah.
I mean, do you think levels of general public knowledge and awareness of insects generally in entomology has got better or worse in your?
I think amongst certain people it has improved, those who are interested in things around them, I guess, but amongst the sort of the rest of the population, the general population, and they're not really very interested, and they're suspicious of you if you're doing anything like that, and they don't really, it's a bee, why don't you just squash it, it's an insect, I'm not interested in insects, I don't want them near me, it might sting me, I hate it, I don't like it, because also there are so many less insects around. I wasn't very good within spiders. I daddy longlegs couldn't cope with them as a child, and yet I wouldn't go around squashing them, because that's the way I was taught, was well, you just put it out or whatever, or you put up with it. But now there's so many fewer that people don't have to get used to them. Oh, moths coming to lights as well when we were children, and you just don't have to put up with that anymore. You can leave a window open, you don't get stung, and therefore when they do see something, they panic about it and think it has to be killed.
Yeah,
and I think that's the real problem.
Yeah, and that kind of lack of knowledge about, I mean, is that, so do you think overall there's been a reduction in that insect biodiversity then?
Oh, hugely, yes, hugely, yeah. I mean, we used to drive on holiday to, to mountainous areas, so Wales or the Lake District or Scotland, and every couple of hours my dad would have to stop to clean the windscreen. Everybody says this. He used to have to stop to clean the windscreen and the number plate and so on, and give it a real good soak when you got home and all that. Otherwise you couldn't see out, even with windscreen wiper. I mean, obviously they weren't as efficient, But I mean, you don't get that now. In fact, there were a couple of times in the last couple of years where I've actually got, oh, I've got insects on my windscreen, and it's been, oh my goodness, this must be a wonderful area. Let's go and really investigate it. Yorkshire Dales, bits of Yorkshire Dales, I've had that.
Yes.
There was another place I went and I thought, well, there are insects here. But even in the northeast, where you'd think we were fairly away from the big, agriculture areas, but unfortunately we're not. It's everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc., etc. Just and climate change is not helping. But I think it's habitat loss and chemicals,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And we don't find out till too late that the chemicals are dangerous, and then it's too late and they're already in the system. So
to rebuild it, I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
they could rebuild if we could change things. They could rebuild.
Yeah.
They're very, they will bounce back. If you think of even birds, populations will bounce back if you give them the right conditions. I think insects would do, but the trouble is there are too many of us using too many chemicals and putting too much stuff in the water and the air and the sea, and you can't. And we're just taking up too much land, with roads and house building and and you can understand why.
Yeah.
Live somewhere, but there are just too many.
Yeah, and you sort of need a kind of a joined up approach on a bigger scale as possible, don't you, to help that rebuild?
I mean, it's a very depressing picture if you start thinking about it, really. So you can only do little bits in your area and do the best you can, as well as lobby people to change things, obviously.
Yes.
But, I don't have an instant solution apart from
just raising awareness as well, I suppose, isn't it? And yes, I know, which is what work like yours does, I suppose. I mean,
it does add to the picture. That's the main thing. It adds, the records add to the picture of what is happening out there. You can compare things, and these wasp mounts have got a huge, real good record over the years, serious records for a long time, and so those are very much used in scientific, investigation and modelling and so on.
Yes.
Because they're a very good resource, and you need those, and you need the collections, because you can't, go back and look at things if you haven't got a collection to see.
Yes, that's right.
What's changed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose it could be a positive or a negative one, but do you have a most memorable nature moment?
Yes, I suppose it has to be in the northeast, obviously. So I would say probably. One summer, I'm trying to think how long ago it was now. It's a good long time ago now, 8-10 years ago. I went to Allen Heads, to a site up there, particularly for somebody suggesting it might be good for solitary bees. And I was wandering around. I was also recording bumblebees at the time for the just because I was recording bumblebees, really. I do a bee walk for Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and so that really got me into recording bumblebees there on a particular transect, but also elsewhere in the county. And I think it was before the bumblebee book. So it was, anyway, I was looking at bumblebees and I was wandering along, and I found this site that had been recommended, and I saw a bumblebee that looked very similar to one I'd seen before, but not identical. And I thought, well, I've only just seen that 10 minutes ago at that other site, but this isn't the same. I thought about, and I thought, oh, it can't be something rare, surely. And the more I thought about what, I know what this is. If it isn't the ordinary common one, which I don't think it is, I know what this is. And to actually know what something is that's rare that you've never seen before, when you first see it, I don't get that very often. Occasionally I might, if I've got something under a microscope that I've collected 6 months before and I've really worked out what it is, but that's not the same. This is in the field, actually going just by sight. Oh, I know what that is. And that was really, and that was the broken belted bumblebee. Which is it's quite rare. We do have it in Northumberland, but only at 2 knowns, or in the northeast. So it's mainly County Durham and Northumberland, and so it was a new site.
Wow.
So that was really, and it's quite a strong site.
Yes.
So to recognise them, and the next site is over in Teesdale, the next nearest site. So that was really quite quite. I was very, even now I can feel that excitement of this was a real discovery for me. I suppose, isn't it? It's a discovery of something that nobody else sees or knows is there.
Yes, and you had the expertise to make the discovery as well.
It was the fact that not only did I know it was something, it wasn't just that I had to take a specimen and go, this is something different, what is it? It was, I know what this is now, I'll go away and prove it.
Yes.
And so, and then the detective work comes in, obviously, and and then talking to other people who know about it and saying, look, this is what I think I found. And they go, yes, you have, I'm coming up next day to look at it, and that sort of thing. So that was really, yeah, lots of people have been to see it since. So that was really exciting. And I
Yeah.
suppose the other one, it's not quite the same. I don't know if it really counts in the same thing, but I was involved with the briefly what's it called, Rescued from the Sea project, looking at doing archaeological dig at Hawksley,
Oh, wow.
and just on the edge of the reserve there. The sea was inundating and taking out a lot of archaeological sites they knew were there, and so they had to dig it up basically before it was totally destroyed by the sea. And I was only there for 3 or 4 days, but I found a leaf head arrowhead, a flint arrowhead, but the leaf shaped one.
Yeah.
I really didn't know anything about, so that was and it was absolutely perfect. And to think that I'm the only first person that's touched it since it was dropped by somebody all those thousands of years ago was just mind-blowing. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I'm having two moments.
That's allowed, and because I was thinking, listening to you, it speaks to your very broad education and interests and the sort of inspiration of the upbringing too, doesn't it? Landscape, archaeology. Yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. It's that, wide, broad upbringing and broad education, which was fueled by my parents, but also I suppose they must have just fueled the interest in general. Anything I saw, I was interested in. And
yes.
That was normal and acceptable, and that's what we did. So when you go away and learn about it, and you look it up in a book and you learn about it, which was a little difficult. I'm slightly dyslexic, or mildly dyslexic, and I was very, very dyslexic as a child, and so looking things up was actually quite difficult. But I think that's possibly why it was encouraged.
Yes,
that was to try and help me learn how to cope with it.
And like that independent sense of independence.
Yeah. So yes, it very much comes from my parents, and the family friends as well. All had the same interests. They were either walkers or bird watchers, or interested in all those sort of things. And also, I think that particularly, say, this large extended grounds of the garden was sort of, and grounds or whatever you call them. Each of the different families did different things within that, and each of the adults were therefore had different skills. So one of them was interested in forestry and was very much managed the trees and so on. They weren't just left; they were managed. Things were properly looked after, and to the advantage of wildlife, really.
Yes,
which was obviously, it wasn't said like that in those days. It was just that's what they did. Things were looked after because they were important.
Yes, amazing.
Sort of, in those early days, that just seemed just just the way they were.
And I mean, you talked there about finding that rare bee in a particular place, and maybe that is a favorite place of yours now because of that. But do you have any other favorite places for natural history in the Northeast?
I was trying to think of that, and it's funny, I was thinking, well, there aren't very many. And then I thought, oh well, so if I was going somewhere in the summer to look for something interesting, where would I go, or spring or whatever? And I thought, well, early in the year, maybe April, May, June or something like that, I would go somewhere like the Spetchels in Provo, which lots of people don't know unless you're local. You wouldn't know. It's on the Tyne. It's a spoil heap of chalk, and chalk grassland in Northumberland is very rare. So this is, specialist. Obviously, it was man-made originally, but it's very special. And it's again, it's a bee thing, I'm afraid. The chalk grassland is absolutely brilliant because it drains very quickly and it heats up quickly, and it's home to 300,000-400,000 solitary bees. And at that time of year, the females of one of them, the buffish mining bee, which is the most numerous one, emerge. The males emerge first, and then the females, and you get this haze off the ground, about a foot off the ground. And it's just a haze, like there's a fog all over the ground of these thousands and thousands of bees. And it's just amazing. You have to be there on the right day. You go the day before and the weather's not so good. They're not there, or there's only a few, or they're sitting on the ground because it's cold. So some years they're much better than others, but absolutely amazing. And then, of course, you get all their parasites and interesting bee kleptoparasites and things that, lay their eggs in their nest, and all sorts of interesting things. And lots of other species there as well. And it's also a site that's very good for dingy skipper, which is a very rare butterfly. So I'm part of the management scheme for it, where we're trying to maintain it because it's getting over, as things do, it's getting overgrown with seedlings and bramble, but particularly cotoneaster. The bird has obviously brought a seed in and has spread everywhere, and it's very steep-sided, and it's just a nightmare trying to, it will never get it off the sides, so it will always re-invade, but trying to keep it off the top to keep these meadows open is, and they're not big, it's a small area.
Yeah.
It's proving to be quite quite hard work. We're not winning at the minute.
Right.
We're trying, we're working at it, but we're not winning at the minute.
It's kind of there's a sort of a sense, isn't there, that of the requirement of kind of constant observation and management to protect rare sites.
Yes. Well, it's difficult because you're asking a site that was, 20, 30, when I first came there, 30 years ago, it was an open site. The trees had not grown up fully on the sides because it was planted on the sides because they are very steep, but they've now grown above the sides so the wind doesn't come across. Vegetation's got ranker, but it's natural succession. The trees are feeding onto it. It's natural, and we're trying to stop it doing what it would naturally do. If we leave it, we would lose all these. There are 1 or 2 rare species on there we would lose, and it would turn into a common woodland, but not even a very interesting one, probably because there's very limited. They weren't naturally planted with wild trees. They were, commercially planted by the Forestry Commission. So they're not really very interesting. They've got ash dieback. A lot of seedlings. So it's a never-ending battle basically, and deciding what to keep and what. So we'll probably end up trying to just keep certain areas open. And people don't understand what you're trying to do either. They, if you cut a tree down, they get upset. And
but what about the bees?
Yes, exactly. Well, what about the butterflies? What about this lovely pristine meadow? And we do make recording of what species of plants are there as well, and we've had plant experts who come and help as well.
Yes.
And we've got orchids, and we've got some really interesting stuff. It's a lovely meadow when it's in its full flower. It's lovely.
That's
a super area. So that would be early in the year, I think. And then maybe later in the year, well, I mean, Upper Teesdale, Upper Weardale, the meadows up there, I mean, they're just stunning, aren't they, for birds and insects, butterflies, everything, beetles, hoverfly, everything's just wonderful. It's just so beautiful up there as well.
Yes.
And then I suppose moving on, probably get meadows again in the autumn. Places
meadows are a theme. Yes,
they are. I've just realised that. Such as Allen Heads again. We're back to the Allen Heads site. That's an autumn one. It's very good in autumn. Well, Septemberish and late summer. And Williamston, there's a little nature reserve at Williamston.
Right.
Tiny nature reserve, but it's just beautiful. It's right by the river. Oh, it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
So yeah. I suppose I love the walk to Hareshaw Lynn. I was going to add that one in. Bellingham, you know that?
Yes, I know.
I mean, that I just think is stunning, and you've got the old trees and you get interesting birds and dippers and all sorts going on. And just and fungi at this time of year is just amazing.
I love
forwards. Oh, it's just wonderful.
I love the way you've got a sites for different times of the year. And
well, I thought that was
your broad interest.
Yeah, well, I was trying to think, if you pick one site, it's one thing, but when you pick a few, it gives you, bigger. Yeah. And then the other thing I suppose I particularly like is watching things like jackdaws and rooks on my own doorstep at dusk at this time of year, watching flying in towards their roosts and their pre-roosts before they go further up the valley. And then there's maybe a couple of hundred of them all milling around, and sometimes they'll do a good swirl, and other times they just fly by. But there's this fly past. It's just the whole of it's the ceiling of the sky is just full of birds and making wonderful noises. So and mainly jackdaws, unfortunately. I prefer there to be more rooks, but that's just me.
I know.
I like rooks. So so those are my main highlights, I guess.
Places.
And play favorite places and favorite things. So
Well, if we can imagine not a dreek January day, but a nice fine summer's day, and talking of trees, if you could sit under a tree on a sunny day with a favourite book, what would it be?
It would have to be an oak tree. Sorry, I have to get that one in.
Okay, good to confirm.
Preferably on a mound, so that the oak tree has its branches right, which is what we had as a child. There was a big mound, tree on the top, and the branches come all the way down to the ground like a skirt all the way round.
Yes.
Surrounded by little birds tweeting through it and insects. Sorry, anyway, all about that. So if I could sit there in the dappled shade, I would probably pick a poetry book, and I think I would probably pick Kathleen Jamie. And I love her The Tree House.
Right.
One of her poetry books, but I also like her prose writing. She writes essay type books. There's one called Findings, and it's just little selections of things, and they all involve natural history of all sorts, all the things I love, basically, birds and insects, and not so much insects, but certainly birds, landscape, little bits of geology, lots of prehistoric things, and just all things I'm interested in, and she just writes so beautifully.
Yes.
Yes. So you obviously know her as well.
Yes, I've read some of her work, and I must agree, probably sitting in the dappled shade reading some of her work would be.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, I was, I don't get much time to, well, I don't make much time to read, I suppose I should say, except scientific papers, just trying to keep abreast of what's going on.
Right.
But once I've fully retired, eventually it stopped being on these committees and helping with conservation and doing all these other things that I probably will continue to do. I will go back to reading. I used to read novels a lot.
Yeah.
But I don't seem to have the time now, but I'm doing interesting things, so doesn't really matter. But I am into poetry as well as all these other natural history type things. So so
yes,
that, yeah.
This future imagined time when you have lots more time to.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, as well as that, I mean, you have such broad interests. I mean, do you have any other pursuits that either sort of feed into these interests or just completely separate?
I think we've probably picked up most of them so far. Things like prehistoric archaeology, I'm very interested in, early people, and even physical anthropology. At one stage, that's what I wanted to study, but that didn't happen. There was only one course in the country and they didn't take me. So, and I do write poetry, so I've produced a poetry pamphlet. I really ought to concentrate that a bit more. Gardening, I'm very into gardening, but again, that seems to have gone a little bit by the wayside. With too busy being, when I'm out looking for bees, or meeting friends to go for a walk or whatever. So yeah, walking, gardening, recording, anything. I do record other things as well, not just bees. I am not just fixated totally with bees. But I am a bee bore. At one stage when the children were in their teens, they did, if I said, oh, should we go for a walk? They said yes, but not if you're going to look for bees. You're not allowed to look for a bee the whole time. I said,
you're banned from
looking. And then I learned not to go on about it. And then we have had more recently, now the boys are older, they do occasionally send me photographs and go, oh, we saw these bees, what are they? And I thought, yes, you did it. Hooray, they're getting it. Yes, particularly the youngest one, he's really quite interested in it, but the elder one's interested in things around him as well.
It's that kind of cycle of inspiration continuing.
Yes. I can't imagine they'll ever get very involved with insects, but certainly the gardening thing, I think, although they never really, they did sort of garden a little bit, but usually I did it on my own time when they weren't around, because it was my thing that I actually could do to relax when they were, young and not easy. And I did do that a lot. But interestingly, both of them are interested in allotments and maybe getting gardens when they're older. And you can see the younger one's already got plants on his window, on his balcony in London.
Yes.
The older ones had to go to an allotment and with friends and things. So yeah, so they have taken stuff in. You think they don't, but they are.
Sounds like it, actually.
Yeah.
It's how many of your interests and activities go back to your childhood?
Yes, all of them. Yes, almost every single one of mine, definitely. And I think theirs probably will. Yes, I think so. But interesting that they're both interested in food and cooking as well. So does that tell you that's what I like as well?
Well, it just made me think of you were saying about fruits and vegetables being grown in your with your parents and the hen eggs and things.
Yes, anything. When we were young, you could eat anything you like as long as a fruit or a vegetable, or was made with an egg, but we didn't have much else. So my dad's joke until the day he died, he would say, of course your mother could always said she could make at least 50 things as long as they were made with eggs or apples. They were made with that. She knew 50 recipes for eggs or apples, and that was, he said it was a joke. I'm not sure it is a joke, but it kept them going. And when I was very young and before I was born, wasn't quite the good life, but it was that sort of, they did grow so much fruit and veg, they sold it locally,
right?
Stores and things.
Incredible now to think. And all those decades of sort of mass production and supermarket kind of food, and then now we're sort of coming back around to issues like provenance and organic food.
Well, local and organic, I still think are really important that we can do that. The more we can do that, the better.
Yes. Well, well, thank you so much, Louise. That's been absolutely fascinating.
Sorry, I was going to say you've managed to get a word in edgeways occasionally as well.
I just, it's just so fascinating, and how connections across a lifetime and generations and places,
Yes.
you know, nationally and internationally. And I think that sense of encouraging curiosity and independence of exploration just kind of feeds through all of your life's work, really. It's incredible, whether it's poetry or bees or,
and I think, I mean, Newcastle University has been also one of those influences in there, because, you know, a lot of it was done there, and, you know, I'd be very happy to go back and do, you know, another few degrees and stay around listening and learning and, you know, being told.
You're meant to be retired, Louise.
No, but I love learning, you know, learning new stuff is really, yeah, what keeps me going, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. Well, you shouldn't have said that out loud. Now I'll be writing to you afterwards to
No more. I can't
Sorry, I was only joking.
I know, it's all right. Anyway, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, absolutely. Thank you from my behalf, but also on behalf of the society. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.